Hi there, I'm Ray from 8base, and today I'm going to show you how to build a full stack application using just 8base. Let's get started. For our video today, I'm going to be building a web application for the 8base Footy League, which is a soccer league managed by 8base. So to get started, I need to create a new project. So we're going to click the Create Project button. I have to give the project a name, so we'll call it the 8base Footy League. We're going to make it a full stack application. You could choose between backend only or full stack, but for this video, we're doing full stack, and I'm going to jumpstart with accelerators. So what is jumpstart with accelerators? Well, the 8base accelerator is a starting project that basically starts you out with a front end that has everything you need. So from this one click to create a project, I'm going to have access to navigation, authentication, styling, theming, dark mode and light mode, user management, user profile management. All of these pieces are going to be right there ready to deploy. And all I have to worry about is building the stuff that I actually need for my 8base Footy League. So our project is generated, and we're going to start at the same place that all developers start, which is in the backend, building out our data model. So here in our backend, I'm going to go over into the data tab, and I'm going to create a new table. So I'm going to create my teams table. I'm going to give the table the name teams. And the first thing I'm going to give it is a field called name, because every team has to have a name, right? So the name field is going to be a text field. 100 characters is a good amount for a name. And I'm going to make it mandatory because every team has to have a name. The next field that I'm going to add is, I'm going to call it kit color. And what kit color is it's the color of the shirt that each team is going to be wearing. Now I could go with a text and have people manually enter in colors, but for kit color, I'm actually going to go with a switch field. Now what's a switch field? Switch gives you the capability of on, off, yes, no, true, false, all of the standard Boolean availabilities for a switch, but I can also create a custom switch field. And what this custom switch field does is it allows me to create a data enumeration at the data layer. So instead of having to manage data enumeration at the API layer and the front end layer and in the backend data layer, I'm creating an enumeration directly in the data layer using a custom switch. So here for my kit colors, I'm going to say that they're allowed to have red kits, they're allowed to have black kits, they're allowed to have white kits, they're allowed to have purple kits, and they're allowed to have green kits. Let's click create field on that one. The next field that I'm going to add is going to be the skill field, because every team has a skill level, and we want to be able to organize the teams by skill level. So for this, I'm going to have a number, and it'll be like a 1 to 5 skill level. So our minimum value will be 1, our maximum will be 5. And for a default value, I'm just going to put 3. Next, every team can have a logo, right? Every team loves to have a logo for their team. Now, typically in a database, you would have this as just like a text field, so you can put in a link to a logo that's somewhere off in file management. But with 8base, we actually have a file field. And what the file field does is it allows you to manage all of your files through 8base. So no more having to, manage AWS S3 or some kind of file provider somewhere. With 8base, you get file management. So we have our logo field. Next, every team has a manager, and our managers, we want to be able to log into the system. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to connect the users table to our team table. So by doing this, I'm just going to drag and drop users. I'm going to name it to manager. Over on the user side, I want the field name to be manage teams. And I want to allow multiple teams per user because I want a manager to be able to potentially manage multiple teams. Let's click create field. And finally, what's the one thing missing that every team has? A team has players. So once again, I can connect to the users table in a separate field. So this I'm going to be changing to players, and teams is a great name for this over on the user side already. But instead of this one-to-many relationship, I want to create a many-to-many relationship, because not only do I want a team to have multiple players, but I want to be able to let a player play on multiple teams. So by clicking this bottom one, I'm actually adding a many-to-many relationship between teams and users. Perfect. So we have our data model in the system. Now let's add some data. There's a few ways to do this. You can add it through the data tab by manually adding in different records. You can even use an import CSV in order to import records. But because I have a table here that works with files, what I want to do is I want to use the API in order to import my data. So you're probably asking, what API are you talking about? We've just created a table. That's all we've done. Well, some of the cool magic about 8base is that as you're creating a table, we are automatically generating a GraphQL API in the backend. So if I come over to the API Explorer and open up the Explorer here to get more information, you can see that under my queries, I have a Teams query and I have a Teams list query that allows me to retrieve the records for Teams. And not only does it let me retrieve the records, but I can do things like filtering. I can filter by any of the fields. I can group records if I want to. I can sort records. And because I'm using GraphQL, I don't have to worry about the N+1 problem, where if I'm querying a team, I have to get a manager ID and then do another query for the manager information. Instead, because I'm using GraphQL, I can query a teams list, and for each team, I can come here and I can say for the manager, I want the first name, last name. I can do the same thing for players. For the logo, I don't just need the file ID and then query out for a download URL. I just have the download URL here. So with the GraphQL API we're generating, we give you access to your data with sorting, filtering, and relationships all built directly together. And this isn't just for queries. We've also added endpoints for team mutations. So you can see here, I have team create, team delete, team destroy, team restore, and team update. And I can delete by ID or delete by filter. And I can create many at the same time. So to import this data, I'm going to be using this team create mutation that 8base has already created for me. And to do this, I'm going to be using the 8base CLI, which gives us access to create 8base functions in my local environment and then deploy to 8base when I'm happy. So to create my 8base project, I'm going to go to my 8base directory and I'm going to say 8base init. I'm going to give the project a name. I'll call it 8base footy, and I'm actually going to say -e. Now, when I say -e, what I'm saying is create an empty project. If I don't specify the -e, it will create a new functions project with a whole bunch of examples of how to create and implement 8base functions. For this project, I'm just going to say 8base init, and I need to choose the workspace that I'm working with, which is the 8base footy league. Now I can go into the directory for 8base footy and open up my IDE, which is VS Code. So I'll drag this over onto the proper screen. And you can see here that the CLI created a package.json, an 8base.yaml, and a workspace JSON file for the workspace information. Now, package.json may look familiar to you, and that's because we're using Node for our 8base functions. And because we can use Node, we can use any NPM packages that are available in order to create and deploy functions with 8base. So the next thing I'll do is I'm going to generate a new function, and I'm going to create a task function. So I'll say 8base generate task, and I want to call this function import teams. So you can see we have new files that are created right here, and in our 8base YAML file, we have a new function declaration for import teams. Now, there's a bunch of logic that goes into importing data. So what I'm going to do is I've already got this information and I'm going to paste it in, but I'm going to walk you through what this code does, so you're not lost. So let's go up to the top, and you can see that we're using GraphQL tag FileStack.js. So I'm going to say 8base install GraphQL tag FileStack.js, and I'm also going to say @type/node. Just so that I know that I have my node types inside of my TypeScript. Yep, I used the wrong CLI there. I shouldn't be using 8base to do that. I should be using npm. So let's do npm install for all of those different libraries, and we'll have the libraries in our project. Perfect. So let's go through the rest of the code. Now, the file upload sign info is actually information from 8base about the different API values that are needed to upload files. So that's that GraphQL query. Here we have a mutation to actually create a file record inside of 8base. And then we have a mutation to actually create a team using that team create mutation that we saw in the API Explorer. So this function gets the file info using that query that we saw above. This function here takes in a file name, uploads the file with all of that API information into Fullstack, and then actually creates a file record for the logos. Finally, the main code for our function reads in a teams.json file, gets the file info, and then for each team in that JSON file, it will manipulate the data a bit, it'll upload the logo, and then it will create the team. Now, you can see that we're talking about a JSON file, and obviously we're talking about images, which we don't currently have in this project. So I'm just going to copy paste here. And you can see that now I have a bunch of images, and I have the teams.json file that has the information for our teams. So now to execute this, I can just say 8base invoke local. And what invoke local does is it executes the function locally, but still within the same context of our 8base API. And then I say import teams. And when I hit enter, and once the function is complete, we can go back into our API and we can see that our teams are now inside of our table. And not only are our teams inside of our table, but we've actually created new users within that one mutation. So in the mutation to create a team, not only did we create the team, but we created the manager and we created each of the players for each team. Now that our data is in there, the last thing we need on the back end is we need to set up our roles to make sure that the right users are able to see the right data. Now, going into our app services and looking at our list of roles, you see we get two roles by default. We get the administrator and the guest. The guest has access to basically nothing because an unauthenticated user doesn't have data access by default. And the administrator basically gets access to everything because the administrator needs access to everything by default. So we're going to create a new role. We're going to call this role player because when we have a new person sign up to our 8base footy league, we want them to be considered a player by default, which only has access to do certain things. So if we go to this player role, we could see that, we want them to be able to create files so they can upload their own profile photo. They can basically read any files because we want them to be able to read the logos for teams as well. They can update files that are only related to them, and they can delete the files that are related to them. We don't have to worry about their access to roles. In terms of teams, we don't want them to be able to create a team, but we want them to be able to read all of the teams. We don't want them updating or deleting any of the teams. And then when it comes to users, we want them to be able to read all of the users to see all of the players and managers in the system, but we only want them to access information related to them. So you can see here we have a custom filter that says they can update the user whose ID is equal to their currently logged in ID. This is a custom filter that ensures that they'll only be able to update user data related to them. So we hit on save and we now have our player role. Let's quickly go into our authentication and update our authentication profile to say when someone signs up by themselves, they're going to get access to the player role. Great. Our backend is ready for us to use. We can move on to our front end. So let's go back to our console and open up our front end. And if you remember, for the front end, we just created a project saying, give us the jumpstart with accelerators. And when we look here at the actual project, you can see that by default, we've got a whole bunch of stuff already waiting for us. We've got navigation, we've got top navigation, we've got profile over here. We've got pages to manage my account, to manage team members, and all of our login, logout, reset password, and sign up. This is all available by default with our Jumpstart with accelerators. So let's start making the changes that we need for our 8base footy league. And we're going to do that by getting started with our primary layout. So here we've got our logo up top and we're going to change this logo. What we'll do is I'll upload a new logo. So I'm going to drag and drop this logo and then click the logo here and make a little bit of changes because it's kind of a little big. So we'll change the width and the height to be 96 pixels. There, that looks nice. Next, you can see that we have these module A, module B, module C, and these are kind of like starter pages. Now, we're only building a page today just to show off our teams. So I'm not going to use all three of these. So I can select B and C and get rid of those and then just work with module A. Now for module A, we want to change this to actually be teams. So here we're going to pick our icon and we're using code to select the icon because we want the icon to change depending on whether or not it's the current page. So I know that I'm using the material UI icon groups. So I'm going to say groups here. And then this code will indicate if I'm on the teams page, then we're going to have a normal groups icon. Otherwise, we're going to have the outline version. So click on done, and you can see that we have our groups icon here. Next, I want to change my typography here. So instead of saying module A, it's going to say teams. And finally, I want, when this navigation item is clicked on, I want them to navigate to the teams page. So I'm going to say navigate to the router.teams. Now I'm getting an error here because I don't actually have the teams page yet, but once I implement the teams page, that error won't exist anymore. Now that I have the layout set, let's quickly go to the home page, which is the first page that everybody's going to see when they log in. And I'm just going to delete the stuff that I don't need. So dashboard, there's a nice dashboard thing to get started with if you need that kind of thing. Here for the welcome, I'm just going to say welcome to the 8 base footy league. And I'm even just going to get rid of this paragraph here because I don't need it to start. So that's my home page saved. Now let's get our actual team page. So I used module A. Let's keep working with module A. I'm going to change the name of this page to be teams. The path automatically updates based on my page name. And I'm going to change the title to say teams as well. Now, if I look here at this metadata, I see access authenticated. And what that means is that the code that checks to see whether or not the page needs to have an authenticated user will look at that metadata. Now that I'm on my module page, let's change some things around. So I want the title here, the header to be teams, and I want my logo to be the groups one that I was looking at before. See, so I have groups, click apply, and now my page is ready for me to add data. So how do we add data into the front end? Well, the first thing we need is we need access to our API. Luckily, when we create a new project, the backend that we're working with automatically is connected to our front end. Now, if we had other GraphQL or REST APIs we wanted to connect to the front end, we can do that here. But all we really need right now is our own backend, and I already have that connected. So next, I need to create a request for my page, but in order to do that, I need my GraphQL query. So to create my query, let's go back to our backend, and I'm going to go into the API Explorer. And using the Explorer here, I'm going to look under my queries and find that teams list query that I wanted to do before. So I have teams list here, and for each team that I'm going to show, I want to show the name of the team. I want to show the color of the shirt. I want to show the logo. So I'm going to have the download URL for the logo. And then in order to get the manager information, I can just say for the manager, I want the first name and the last name. And for the players, I just want to show a count of the players, right? So typically in a REST environment, in order to get this to happen, I would have to make a call to teams, and then I would have to make a call to users looking for the manager, a call to users looking for players. Here, I can just get access to everything that I need with one query. So we're going to call this query get teams, and I'm going to copy this information. We'll go copy, and then from the front end, so let's click on requests, say add local request. The request I'm going to create is called get teams. Paste my query in, and then for my headers, I need to add my authorization header, and here I'm going to get the value from the state variable authinfo.value.api token. Now, if I hit save and then run, you can see that I get back all the team information. Now that we have these information into the front end, let's put it on the page. So we're going to start with what's called a looper. And the looper is a component that allows you to loop through an array of JavaScript data. So here for loop data, I'm going to say I'm going to get it from a request. That request is my get teams request, and I'm going to get it from the teams list items. Now that item will be called item, and we'll use that later on in code. Now for each team, I know that I'm going to want to have an outline on it. So let's add a container to our looper. And the container, we want to give it a border. So I'm going to go to borders. I'm going to give the border a radius of 8 pixels. And then I'm going to say I want a solid border. The width is going to be 1 pixel, and it's going to be a gray. Now looking here, we could see that it's laid out, one after the other, which isn't really what we're looking for. I'd like it to be spread across the page in much bigger components. So what I can do is come back to my looper and say that I want to display the looper as a grid. Now here I could say, I want it to be 3 columns across. And you can see that it's now 3 columns. I'm going to put 16 pixels in between each of the items. And then I want this whole thing to span across the page. So I'm going to change it so that the looper is 100% of its parent. Finally, let's add a little bit of space above the looper in order to separate from the header. Cool, that's looking better already. Now for each one of our teams, the first thing that I'm going to want to show is I'm going to want to show the logo. So I can drag and drop image here. And then for the image, for the source of the image, I'm going to use the handlebars that we were seeing earlier in order to use code to specify the source of the image. So I'm going to open up the handlebars and I'm going to say item dot logo dot download URL. And I'm going to put this pipe with a blank so that the source can't ever be null. Oh, I think I spelled URL wrong. It's lowercase u, lowercase l. Perfect. For these images, let's make them an even size. So we'll say each one can be 72 pixels by 72 pixels. We'll put some padding on the right of them. Let's say 8 pixels there so that when we put more stuff in, you know what? Not a padding. Let's do a logo or a margin so that when we add more content into these containers, it won't be right up against the image. Now we can see that we probably want some spacing inside of the container. So let's do a padding around the container. Great. Our images are showing nicely. So now we'll add in the data for the team itself. So let's get a container in here and we can see the containers underneath. So for our outer container, we're going to make this a flex, and our inside container, we want that to flex out to the very end. Now inside our information container, we're going to add a typography. And that typography, we're going to set the text to be the name of the team. So we say item.name, and we have our team name. Let's give it a little bit of styling. We'll make it an H6. And I'm the kind of person that appreciates some weight to my fonts. So I'm going to say a semi-bold font. Next, I want the team's shirt color. So I'm going to do another container in here. Oh, I wanted it inside this one. Perfect. And there I'm going to do a typography and an icon. So the typography will just say shirt here. So this will just say shirt. And then I'm going to add a circle icon just to show the color of the shirt. So if we put that icon in with shirt there, we want to change the icon here to be an actual circle. So just this blank circle like this. We want the fill of that to be equivalent to the shirt color. So we'll say item.kit color is, and you know what, let me change that to code and I'll say item.kit color. So now the fill will be the color there. And there's still a couple of things we want to do here. So for this circle, you can see this white one gets kind of lost, right? So I want to add a shadow underneath it. Now, things like a drop shadow for an icon is not a typical CSS. So you're not going to see that in the styles here. But because 8base basically lets me style any way that I want, I have this custom style down at the bottom here where I can put in any CSS that I'm looking for, including a CSS drop shadow filter. So I can paste in this filter drop shadow. And now if we look at our icons, you can see we have that drop shadow underneath the circle. To make things look like they make a little more sense there, we're going to take this container and we're going to say flex. Now let's make our icon have a little bit of a margin on the side of it. Perfect. And we've got our shirt color. Now the last two things we want to show is the name of the manager and the count of players. So we'll take another typography here. We'll put it inside, right? And in this typography, we're going to have the text be string interpolation where we say manager followed by item.manager.first first name and item dot manager dot last name, close my string off and close my handlebars. There we go. We've got the manager name. Now, if I wanted to, I could have come in here and I could have set the code by expanding my Monaco editor and getting a lot more access to my code. But because I knew what code I was typing, it was very easy to just plug in right here. Finally, I want to do the same thing for player, but instead of just dragging and dropping a new typography, I can actually just clone this component and have it created right after the original one, and then change the value here instead to say player, and instead of item.manager, I want this to be item.players.count. Let's click away, and you can see we have the count of players for each of the teams. So it looks like I've got my page the way that I really want it. We're going to save. We're going to actually deploy the application in order to see it in the live environment. To do that, I click on deploy. I get access to my deploy information here. Once I do my first deploy, I'm going to have the URL for the deployment. We have versioning for deploys, so you can see that I'm doing 0.0.1. And let's just click on the deploy button. And this kicks off our deploy process. Once this is done, let's come back and have a quick look. Actually, while this is deploying, there's one thing that I forgot. So if we come in here and we see this team members navigation, this is the ability to edit all of the users that are in the system. We don't want this available to players. So what we can do is we can come back into our layout. And for this navigation, we can set what's called a conditional render. So down here under conditional rendering, we could say we only want to show this if the auth user info, which is a state variable that's automatically available to us, has a value where the roles includes the value administrator, then you will see the menu item. Now, when I click away here, we can see that the item disappears, and that's because the default state value for auth user info actually doesn't have anything in there, so the conditional render won't work. Now I could see that I named that incorrectly, so I'm going to go back into here and I'm going to find this hidden one and change the name so that instead of auth user info, it's ACC auth user info. ACC is a prefix that we put on everything that the accelerator generated for you. So if you see something that starts with ACC, chances are it's something that we built for you. So I'm going to hit save and I'm going to redeploy again. Now that our application is deployed, let's have a look at what we built. Let's open this up. And you can see from the beginning, we already have our sign up. So we already have login and sign up available to us. We have dark mode and light mode that's sitting here. Let's sign up as a user so that we can enter in as a player. So I'll give my name. I will give an email address and I'll give a password. That sounds like a secure password. We'll click sign up. And once sign up is complete, here we are in our application. So you can see we already have a whole bunch of different things available to us. We have dark mode and light mode. We have our user profile here. We have the ability to edit our user profile. We have our navigation over on the side that will collapse and expand. We have our home page, and we have the Teams page that we created. So all I did was create one page, and yet I still have access to all of this available. And you can even see that that team members here isn't available because we signed up as a player. Now, let's say I were to sign out and let's go into the roles and change my user to actually be an administrator. So here I can search for myself and I'm going to, edit the user and update the roles. So instead of it's a player, it's an administrator. Perfect. Now let's go sign back in. We'll sign in again. Use our super secure password. Click sign in. And you can see now we have this team members, and I click on team members and I get access as an administrator to the ability to manage all of the teams, all of the members that are in the system. So there we go. In a very short amount of time, we were able to stand up, create, and deploy a web application with so much functionality already built in. To find out more, check out the 8base documentation, follow 8base Academy on YouTube, head over to 8base community to talk with 8base engineers as well as 8base developers. And until next time, happy coding.